From 2012 to 2016, led the Swiss mission to the European Union in Brussels. From 2016 to 2018, he was head of the Directorate of International Law and legal advisor to the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. In February 2018, the Federal Council appointed him to the Directorate of European Affairs and coordinator of all negotiations with the European Union, with the title of State Secretary. He now serves as Switzerland's new ambassador to the Italian Republic. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Ambassador Roberto Balzaretti.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. This does not make me young, you know, what you told to the audience. 35 years of diplomatic service in many positions, and mainly dealing with European affairs and legal affairs. We will come back to that if you like. So the career of a diplomat. Perhaps I will start with some information about our country, about Switzerland, what we are, how we function. We have a very peculiar institutional setting. And then I move on to what we do in Europe and in the world briefly, if you like, because I think that will be most interesting to you to ask questions and to engage in a discussion with me rather than, you know, to be lectured by me all the time. So Switzerland, I think you position the country more or less. We used to say that Switzerland is in the heart of Europe. Actually, we say that when the European Union was 6, 9, 12 member states. Today with 27, Europe has shifted a little bit to the east. So we are not in the middle anymore, but we are still, you know, neighbors to Italy, to the north, to Germany, to the south, to France, to the west, and to Austria and Liechtenstein to the east. And it has been so for the last 100 million years. And I guess it will be so for the next 100 million years. And when I'm saying that, I want to stress the importance of, for us, of acknowledging this geographical fact. You know, international politics nowadays is mostly geopolitics. And if there is one thing we cannot change, is the place we are on this continent. This has profound implications when it comes to our foreign policy, of course. I am anticipating a little bit, but we have with Baden-Württemberg, which is a land of southern Germany, or with the Lombardy, a big region north of Italy, economic relations which are similar to the ones we have with India or Japan or China. So if you understand what I'm saying, with one region of Germany, we trade as much as we trade with almost with China. Well, back to the institutional setting. There are two peculiar things about the way we function. The one is what we call the semi-direct democracy. I come back to that. And the other one is the federal structure of the country. We are about 9 million people today. The population is growing quite fast, which is also quite specific, you know, on the European continent, mainly thanks to immigration. Of the 9 million people living in Switzerland, 25% are foreigners. And of those 25%, 3/4 are European citizens. Switzerland has gone from 7.5 to 9 million people in 25 years, mainly thanks to immigration. So 9 million people, 26 cantons, actually 23, and 3 of them are, you know, parted in 2 semi-cantons, and more than 2,000 municipalities. So federalism is very important. It means that decisions are taken at the lowest possible level. And actually, this is stated in our constitution. the federal competence, so the competence of the central government, is limited to fields of actions which are given from the cantons to the federal government. Of course, during time, things have shifted a little bit. You know, the world is a much different place than it was in 1848, when the first federal Swiss constitution was approved. But this principle of subsidiarity in a reverse way is pretty much present in the minds and in the way we function in Switzerland. We have 4 national languages. 3 of them are official languages, which means as all laws passed by the Swiss parliament must be passed in the 3 official languages, which are German, French, and Italian, with a big majority of German-speaking Swiss, about 70%, a little bit more, 20% are French-speaking, 7-8% are Italian-speaking, as I am, and then a very small minority are Romansh-speaking people. Romansh is a very ancient language, is a mix of Germanic and Latin languages spoken by about 35,000 people in the southeastern part of Switzerland, in the canton of Graubünden. We have a very developed economy, could define as a post-industrial economy, pretty much turned to services, to the digital world, but we have kept a very important industrial sector. So 25% of the GDP comes from industry. We are one of the few countries in Europe which has not deindustrialized the economy. And given all that, I think that we are pretty well in this world. We have almost no deficit, 35% of the GDP. If you compare to the countries around Switzerland, is a huge performance. We have been, for the last 10 years, the most innovative country of the world, one of the most competitive. And of course, this is historically due to our position, our geographical position. We acknowledge that pretty much. Without going into the history of the country, we can come back to that too, if you like. We have been under the influence of Germany, before it was Germany, or France, pretty much, for almost 3 centuries. We profited pretty much from the environment we could grow, pretty much from the European Union, by the way. We are not a member state of the European Union. We have about 150 bilateral agreements with the European Union, covering all we need to cover, but we are not a member state. And so we have built, during the decades and the century, a well-functioning and well-balanced society and economy. And federalism is, of course, a very important pattern we followed, because it was the only system which allowed us to live together, given our different languages, our different religions. Half of the country in the 20th century was Catholic, half of the country was Protestant, and nowadays, I think more or less 50% are Christians, but we have Muslims, we have Jews, we have all religions represented. And the fact that decisions are taken at the lowest level possible, it's a big advantage when it comes to dealing with such diversities. Actually, one of the mottos of our country is this unity in diversity. If you think of the European Union, which, as you know, was built and successfully developed after the Second World War, well, we are a kind of European Union ante litteram. We were that before, and we are pretty much attached to this federalism, but at the same time of this independence, of this, not going alone. This is not possible anymore, if it ever was, but of this fact that decisions are taken at the lowest possible level. And it comes the second institutional pillar of the country, which is the popular participation in decision-making. We have two ways of doing that. One is what we call referendum, which is the way for 50,000 Swiss people to challenge a legislation by parliament, or an international agreement, which is in our system tantamount to a piece of legislation. So it's a kind of proposal for a negative vote when parliament passes a law. And the second one, which is even more important, I would say, in a way, is the right of initiative. This is when 100,000 people can request an amendment, a modification of the Swiss constitution. If you see these two things, it tells you how parliament, how the government must always take into account the fact that at the end of the game, there might be a popular vote. And this forced us, also during the centuries, the last decades of the 20th century, of a way of legislating, which is a very consensual way. We have to, bring about all possible opinions, all possible political views, and find a suitable compromise so that if there is a popular vote, well, the piece of legislation, the international agreement we have negotiated is not rejected by the people. If it is rejected by the people, it doesn't exist. We have to start all over from scratch. This is also, and I come to the last point of the institutional setting of the country, why we have a government which is I say a coalition government so that you understand what I'm saying, but in fact, they don't have a coalition program. There are 7 members of our government ever since 1848. There have been 7 members, and they represent the 4 largest political parties in the country. So you have 2 from a party, 2 from another one. So, and this allows, the government also to represent, quite precisely the political forces in the country. This forces the government to find solutions which are suitable for the parliament, where, of course, all political parties are represented, all regions of Switzerland in a similar way to the American one. So we have a lower chamber where people are elected in proportion to the population of every canton, plus a senate, an upper chamber where we have 2 senators. We don't call them senators, but that's not important. So 2 representatives per canton, 246 persons dealing with federal affairs. Federal affairs, which are for all countries more or less the same, the economy, foreign trade, defense, all kinds of issues which must be dealt with at the federal level. The cantons have similar systems, cantonal parliaments, cantonal governments, and so on. But the whole system is based on the principle that we have to bring in all political forces, makes things sometimes rather complicated, long. If you discuss with yourself, you come quite quickly to a solution. If you have to discuss among yourselves in this room, it makes things more complicated. But we think that the decisions coming out of these discussions, it's stronger. And so we always have to balance, a world which is getting more and more rapid with the fact that we need to have very solid decisions to bring about all the country, which is a very diverse one. So there's a very brief introduction to the Swiss institutional system. Now, when it comes to foreign policy, which is our main task as diplomats, perhaps 2 or 3 principles. The first one is universalism. So we deal with every country in the world. We think that we have to treat every country in the world on the same level. Of course, the nearer you are to the Swiss borders, the stronger the ties, more profound the relations, that's for sure. If you think of the European Union, which is our main partner, this represents about 50% of our foreign trade. Germany is by far the first partner of Switzerland. Italy is the second on the European continent, France, and so on. But we also have very important relations to the US. We will come back to that, I'm sure. We have very important relations to Asian countries, to China, of course, to African countries. We try and maintain relations on all possible fields of cooperation. You know, I'm talking about economy, but there is the social issues, there is energy, there is innovation, there is technological cooperation, science. There are, of course, difficult issues like, you know, human rights issues, the application of humanitarian international law, the law as the basis of our action. We have in discussions, continuous discussion with all the countries. Of course, we don't discuss the same things with everyone. We are very much attached to the multilateral system because, you know, we are not a small country, we are a mid-sized country, but compared to the big powers, we are a small country. And we are convinced that the force of the law is what we need, and not the right to use the force to impose its own views. Makes sense for a small country. But we base our action on the rule of law, on multilateralism, on common rules. It's a necessity, and at the same time is a conviction. We have a big center of the UN in Geneva. Geneva is the European capital of the UN system with all specialized agencies present there. You have to see it's about 40,000 people working in the International Geneva, as we call it, for multilateralism. Not easy these days. The system is quite under pressure. We can come back to that too. And so we engage with countries all over the world. We engage in multilateral institutions, the UN, at the European level, of course, the Council of Europe, the OSCE. We will chair the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, next year, the OCDE, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation. And we try to be also present, mainly as observer in all regional organizations around the world. Think of the African Union or the Organization of American States and so on. So that's the geography. And then when it comes to the themes, of course, economy is very important to us. You know, the domestic market is by far not enough to maintain the level of life we have. We export 80% of what we produce abroad. And therefore, we are pretty much present when it comes to, you know, to trade, but at the same time, somehow vulnerable, you know, to what's going on these days around the world. As a liberal country and as a country where liberalism and free trade is a, you know, a necessity, seeing that some protectionism, sovereignism is coming back to the world is very worrying to us. And so we try and deal with all issues we can, everywhere we can. Perhaps a last word with Italy. In Italy, we have an historical presence, well, ever since the birth of this country. We have been pretty much present in France, in Germany, of course, in the countries around us. Switzerland is the fifth, sixth partner, economic partner of Italy, more or less. I don't have the precise data of 25. Big Swiss investments in Italy, of course, and on the other end, big Italian investment in Switzerland. We have an Italian community in Switzerland, which is the largest foreign community in Switzerland. 650,000 Italians live in Switzerland. Half of them are also Swiss citizens, so the double nationals, but still, we have 800 kilometers of border, which is the longest Italian border with a foreign country. And we have been, not only neighbors forever, but we share a common language. My mother tongue is Italian. We share a view of what the European continent has to be, what the role of European countries has to be in the world. And then, of course, Italy is in the European Union, is in NATO, is a large, big, powerful country in the European Union. It is in the Mediterranean, which we are not. So there are differences, of course, but the similarities and the common patterns are much stronger than the differences. So what else? Perhaps a last word about our vision. And I'm putting myself in a complicated position because having a vision these days is really complicated. I think that the vision of Switzerland is a vision of a world where, every country can decide freely about its future, its destiny, where people can move around freely, where ideas can move around freely, where we can nourish, ourselves from the influence from abroad, where we can bring us in the discussions around the world, where everyone is treated according to his or her own merits. That's the vision we have. And it's not only a vision, it's a pure necessity if we want to continue, flourish, not only economically, but socially. We've been in the centuries, on this pattern, which was quite different to ourselves. Today, you see Switzerland as a very pacified and flourishing country in the middle of Europe. But during centuries, there were fights in Switzerland. We struggled to reach the point we reached. We were helped sometimes. Napoleon invaded Switzerland at the end of the 18th century, and then he left quite quickly. He was desperate because he wanted to create a unified Swiss state. République Suisse was not possible. But he left Switzerland with a modernized administration. He designed the borders of Switzerland. He, not himself, but France and Germany supported Switzerland at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. So these influences from abroad contributed to what we are today, to the modern Switzerland. And so we are convinced that what we need to do when we deal with foreign issues is to give back all that and try and make the world a better place for all of us. We can discuss all that afterwards, but think of migration, think of economic fairness, think of free trade, think of the use of natural resources. What we went through in history must, in a way, reflect in what we do in the future. So that's the vision we have. And I must tell you that these days it's not that easy because we have war in Europe, we have war in the Middle East, hopefully not anymore. We have trade issues, we have countries which are not really willing to continue applying this general rule of law. We have many difficulties, built during the second half of the 20th century. So that's what I wanted to tell you as an introduction, but I'm here to discuss with you. And as I said, my introduction, not to lecture you. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Would you like to take one question at a time or collect more questions and then answer? Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador, for for your speech. I'm Sofia, I'm an Italian student, and I would like to ask you something. So Switzerland has a sort of historical reputation, let's say, of being a neutral country, throughout the centuries. But with an evolving geopolitical situation at the international level, I would like to ask you if, as of today, Switzerland is still maintaining that status, let's say, or if it is somehow involved in the net of international conflicts happening today. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your speech. So I wanted to ask, with this semi-direct system, citizens can directly influence policy making. And I wanted to ask, with the spread of social media, disinformation and information manipulation, given how integral these referendums are to the Swiss democracy, how has this social media disinformation and information manipulation affected how Swiss citizens approach referendum questions and take in complex referendum questions? And in turn, how does it affect the quality of decision making by public policymakers, and how does it shape the policymaking? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Aurora and I'm Italian. I wanted to ask you, since you talked about the vision according to which every country should decide freely, and then you talked also about a lot about multilateralism, so the importance of like relations with the other countries worldwide. How do you think these two aspects should be combined in a way? Thank you.
Technically. Cool. Thank you very much. So the first question is about neutrality. I refrained from using, from telling about neutrality in my introduction because I knew it would come. Perhaps here again, without being a lawyer, I am. There is one thing that will surprise you, probably surprise you, is that neutrality today, I mean, there is a long history of neutrality of Switzerland, a very integral one, differentiated one, we could talk about ours, but today we can actually do everything we like, but provide weapons system or our territory to a party of a conflict, of an international conflict. Which means that, probably referring to the Russian-Ukrainian war. Even though we have sanctioned Russia, we have explicitly, stated that the Russian aggression is unlawful, without a decision of the Security Council of the United Nations, saying that actually this is not a war between two states, but an aggression of one state of the other, we have, according to the law of neutrality, considered this conflict as a conflict between two states. And if it is so, we are not allowed by law to provide weapons to one or the other of the party. And this is why we cannot support the military effort of Ukraine. It's the only issue in this very complicated, situation we cannot do, because we can sanction Russia economically. We did receive all European sanctions ever since. I don't know what we have now, the 15 or 16, package of sanctions. We have provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We will provide billions in the reconstruction of Ukraine. We have seized and blocked Russians' deposits, money, and so on. So the only aspect which has not changed yet, and this would mean that we have to change the law of the neutrality. I don't know if there are lawyers in the room, but there are two Hague's Convention of 1907, very old convention, and then there is customary law, international customary law. Providing weapons to a party in a conflict is a violation of the obligation of the neutral. That's what we cannot do. All the rest we've done. And there are discussions in our parliament, there are discussions among the population, whether this maxim of foreign policy is still the adequate one, given what's happening. And 90% of the Swiss population thinks that neutrality is still a valid principle of our foreign policy. So this is where we stand today. It has put us in complicated situation at the beginning of the war. I think that in the meantime, countries have understood what we can do, what we cannot. And by the way, you know, the capacity of Switzerland to provide weapon and weapon systems to Ukraine is very limited. What they need, we don't have. Even if we could, we will not be very, very useful. The second one is very good and very complicated question. You know, if you want to have a popular government, which is what we have by this direct democracy, you have to have the right information, or you have to provide people with the capacity to inform themselves properly. And this is a major issue in the rapidly changing world, and especially given, you know, the power, the growing power of social media, but not only of social media, of manipulation of the information we witness. When there is a vote in Switzerland, though, the discussions go on for months. You know, you have discussions in parliament. You have then 3 months time for the people to collect signatures and to challenge a piece of legislation. And then there are weeks and months of discussion, mainly on classical media, you know, newspapers. We have in all region of Switzerland, public broadcasters, both radio and television. They have a duty of, you know, of objective information. So I would say that even though I see the dangers you're pointing at, as of today, the information about what we are voting on in Switzerland is still a very objective one. So you can build your opinion properly. But of course, there is a danger, a growing danger, you know, especially, I don't know how many among you read newspapers still. I don't know. I don't know how many, you know, listen to public radio in the morning. I still do. I wake up and the first thing I have the news on Swiss public radio. I don't know how many of you still are on this classic, you know, media. I guess that most of you are on your smartphones. And this reflection about what this means when it comes to, you know, to building an objective opinion and then expressing it properly, yeah, it's something we are worried about, and we work on that. Very difficult to manage. One of the ideas would be to have, and so I'm using terms which are not precise enough, but you know, this kind of objective information also on the channels you are used to, and not the classic ones. We are aware of all that. And we monitor, of course, what's happening. There were a couple of episodes. The federal chancellery is dealing with all that, where we had the impression that something happened. Not enough to change, you know, the balance of the good expression of, or the proper expression of public opinion. But we know that in a couple of issues, there was something. And we have also an idea where it comes from. Very difficult to cope with, but it's a necessity that we need to address. If we want to, not to turn this direct democracy into a farce or worse. The last question, if I understand you properly, is the relation between sovereignty and and multilateralism. So actually, when you enter into an agreement, any agreement, bilateral one, you are, of course, first of all, defending your positions, your interests, but at the same time, you're acknowledging the interest of the party you're dealing with. And so you give up a small part of your sovereignty because you are convinced that together you will gain. So if you are in a win-win situation, both will gain, and mainly in order to gain, you have to give up something. Unless you are a very big country with a very big president who thinks that he can win everything. But this is quite rare in foreign policy. In multilateralism, it's even more so, because you have to find a very large compromise. But at the same time, you are gaining much more. If you have a WTO rule about tariffs, not to mention, not to speak this word, then everyone will profit at the same time from the fact that you have given up something and that other countries also have given up something. That's the principle of multilateralism, finding common ground for common solutions, which mainly are only possible, first of all, if everyone agrees, and second, if everyone is ready to give up a little something. And of course, you are giving up some sovereignty. But there are very old theories about sovereignty, what sovereignty is. In our world, sovereignty is mostly shared. So we try to elevate this principle at an higher level. Think of the European Union, Of course, every member state has to give up on something. But all together, they think they are stronger. Probably it is true. And so that's the mechanism. I don't see a contradiction. And as I said, I think many times before, it's valuable. So it's good to do so, but it's probably a necessity. So, unless you can think that you can act alone and that you can, make sure that you defend your interest, the interest of your population, in all possible, fields of cooperation, being alone. I don't think it was ever possible in history, but it's for sure not possible today, or not in the long term. That might be possible for a short time, and perhaps in the short time must even be, necessary to do so, to state your position. But once you've done that, if you are not able to enter into a discussion in order to find, something common, think of migration, think of energy, think of climate, water management. How can you be sovereign if the sources of the water are in the neighboring country? You cannot. So you have to deal with this other country. And if Switzerland put a dam and, to stop water from going to Italy, well, might be sovereign for a short time, but, Italy will revenge in something else. And then that's a lose-lose. So that's why we are so convinced that, while we, as any other country, defend our interests, we better defend them together in a larger way.
Hi, my question is, what are your breakpoints in your life, maybe studying life, career life, that allowed you to become an ambassador? Thank you.
I actually have a question before I give the mic to someone else. Okay, I wanted to ask, I was actually quite impressed about the voting procedures that the Switzerland has and the popular participation in the legislative process. And it's something that in Italy we do not have. We don't have that much. We don't have affluences really to people that go vote. We have seen that in the last elections and in the last European elections, in the last referendum, less and less people go and actually express their preference. I was wondering if in Switzerland you find that people are shifting away from referendums and from voting, and if not, why do you think that in Switzerland you have this profound culture for expressing a political preference? Is school is something that also in Italy we can implement in some way? So, your opinion on that?
Okay, I take this too rapidly. I see you three. I come. Let's make a group of the three ladies there. Perhaps I start with that because it's just a follow-up to what I said before. There is I don't know if I have to use this word, but there might be a crisis of popular participation in votes and in elections, both. But what I'm convinced of is that, knowing that there is a possibility for every piece of legislation, people to challenge it, helps the political process to come out with solutions which are balanced. It even leads sometimes not to have solutions because Parliament cannot agree. And if you don't agree in Parliament, well, pretty much sure that if you force a decision, you will have a referendum and you will have a vote. And there, the turnover will be important. So you see, depending on the issue, we are about, I don't know, 45% participation. We have been conducting studies forever. And what we see is that, people not going, not voting, are 50-50 in favor or against. So it doesn't really change the issue. But it's still not good, that people do not participate. We have introduced at all possible level the possibility of voting per mail. In some cantons, in Geneva, 95% of people vote per mail. So they don't go anymore to the poll. But actually, I think that the preemptive effect of the possibility of a vote is a strong enough, incentive for the legislator to continue dealing the way we deal. And I'm pretty sure that, it's in the Constitution. So if you have to change the system, you have to have a vote. And not only a vote of the people, but also a majority of the cantons to change the Constitution. No, ever will we succeed if we want to reduce, this popular right of deciding on our future. So we cannot change it. But what we have to do, that you might have a point, is find ways to involve also new generation, to find new ways of doing that. We're talking about of electronic, medias, of social medias. Perhaps we have to shift a little bit the way we deal with that, the way we inform people on that. Perhaps you have to have civil servants and diplomats leave their offices and talk to people. That's probably one way of, modernizing the system, but touching it, but I'm sure it's just not possible. It's too rooted in our, in ourselves. And it has been so since 1874. The first Swiss federal constitution, 1848, did not provide for such popular vote. It came in 74 and in 91 of the 19th century as a necessity, to enlarge the basis of participation. And then we changed also, at the beginning, actually only conservative liberals were in the government, then came the Social Democrats, first the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. And so it's a continuously trying to make sure that this very delicate balance is kept. And one of the pillars is for sure, you know, the semi-direct democracy. The breaking points, I hope I had no breaking points in my career. It's a difficult question, you know. Sometimes it's just luck. Sometimes you have at the right place, at the right moment. I think that the changing point of my career was when I was a lawyer. I was heading the section of public international law, and a new minister had just been appointed, a woman from Geneva. And France wanted to organize a G8 meeting. Russia was still there at the time, in Evian. If you see the Lake of Geneva, Evian is just on the French side, you know, vis-a-vis Lausanne. I don't know if they did it on purpose, but they don't have an airport. They don't have infrastructure. So they had to use Geneva airport. They have to use the Swiss infrastructure to bring all the people to Evian. And therefore, it was necessary to negotiate an agreement with France to deal with all that. And I think that in the ministry, no one wanted to do that. And my boss at the time told me, why don't you try and do that? And in doing that, I think I talked to the minister every day for the following months. I had her on the phone all the time. And she noticed me probably. She said, well, this guy, I might use this guy for something else. And it's even an anecdote which is quite funny. I'm not making jokes of anyone, but I was discussing with the Deputy Secretary General of the French Foreign Ministry, Quai d'Orsay. And I was a young diplomat. I was 35 years old. And treated me a little bit like a junior and so on. And I had a cell phone, and it rang during the meeting, which is a total offense to him. He looked at me, how dare you? And I said, sorry, I have to take it. And he was really offended. And it was the minister. I said, yeah, oui, Madame la Conseillère fédérale. Oui, Madame la Ministre. Oui, je vais faire ça. He looked at me like that. I said, you're talking to your minister? He said, oh yeah, all the time. She calls me every time. And it shifted the way it treated me immediately. So after this thing, I came back, we had an agreement. It was, by the way, an half disaster because, you see black blocks these days around, but at that time, this was 2003 or 4, they destroyed Geneva, they destroyed Lausanne. It was a real disaster, but the agreement was done. France paid quite a lot of money because of that. And I think she noticed me. And then she proposed to me to be her diplomatic advisor. And it was the change in my career, because once you are in the cabinet of a minister, you see everything in a very different way. You have something I haven't mentioned yet, but it's evident. But if you don't live in it yourself, you don't notice that foreign policy and domestic policy are the same things. In a government, especially in our government, there are only 7. A federal councillor is, of course, the foreign minister, but she's also part of this cabinet, one of the 7. So she deals with everything. I started to see everything else from other ministries. I was with her on travels and on trips, and this was the real change. And then after that, and I was appointed ambassador, which was quite rare in our system. I was young, and if you behave, once you are an ambassador, you are it forever. So if I look, at those years, I think that the change was that. And then there was a second one, much later, much more difficult. It was when I was appointed Secretary of State for European Affairs, and I negotiated the first deal with the European Union to refund the relations of Switzerland to the European Union, which failed because this agreement was not accepted by the government, was never signed. This was also a turning point of the career, but there I turned back. So the first time I turned ahead, the second time I turned back. But you know, every diplomat will have a different story. Our job is just fantastic because you are exposed to everything. You have access to everything. Sometimes you have quite a big responsibility, you know, in seeing what you see, in telling what you see, in doing it in a way which is understandable to people who are not there. Representing interest is not always easy. I'm mainly online with the interest of my country in the world, but not always 100%, but you still have to. And so every career, it's a different pattern, but very fascinating. So thank you for the question, because I never really elaborated that, but I think that these 2 points were the turning points.
Ambassador, I would like to take the opportunity to make a question. I don't want to steal time from the students, but very quick. Till a few years ago, Geneva was the cradle for all the peace negotiation, was the hub of all the different type of agreement, and Geneva was the city of negotiation. Now, few years, it has shifted, it has moved to the Gulf. More meetings, more negotiations are in Doha, are in the GCC 6. My question is, how do you explain this, and how does your country feels about it?
Thank you very much. I think one explanation is the loss of negotiating power of multilateral institutions. So we did it in Geneva because, well, it was done in Geneva mainly because Geneva was seen as the place in the world where neutrality was possible, not in the legal sense of Swiss neutrality, but, you know, neutrality, and where all international organizations, you know, at the seat. So it was a very suitable place to bring about solutions of difficult problems. Today is probably more a matter of negotiating power of the ones proposing, you know, a deal, a negotiation, than of the power of the place where you do it. I don't know if I'm clear enough, but that's probably one explanation. The second is it requires a huge amount of money to negotiate. They probably do not realize what it means, you know, to bring people in a place and to keep them there for months. In terms of security, of you know, of hosting them and so on. And other countries have more money, probably. And then there is a growing, you know, willingness of other countries to also be part of that. And this has to do with the loss of pertinence, of importance of the European continent or Western world too. So you bring all that together, probably have an explanation. This being said, it is probably absolutely true for peace and security issues. But when it comes to all the rest, there are still, you know, thousands of negotiations going on every day at the OMS, at the, I don't know, at the UMPI, all kinds of, you know, things you don't see because they're quite technical. They still take place in Geneva or in New York or in Vienna and where the multilateral institutions are. When it comes to peace, you know, discussion, negotiations, the last one we had was a meeting between President Biden and President Putin. They were there some years ago. And ever since, we didn't have nothing of that kind. We had a group of Russian parliamentarians in Geneva some months ago. So sometimes things also happen, you know, afterwards. So it's still a place where you can, and there I have to say, we have a big support of European countries to continue keeping Geneva as a place, especially France, for evident reasons. We have a support of European countries not to lose this important pole in Europe. And we work on that. We are investing money. We are thinking of also of new fields of cooperation, you know, technology, science, and so on. So we are trying to keep the fire, but reality is what it is. And, you know, again, some countries it's difficult to compete. I had the three ladies there.
Hi, my name is Monica. Okay. My question was a follow-up question to what you were saying neutrality implies. What are your thoughts on the fact, is there a point at which neutrality stops being a virtue in international law and becomes an obstacle to justice? And it would be better to apply impartiality instead. What are your thoughts on this? And if you think Switzerland through history ever crossed that line? Thank you.
So during the last General Assembly session in September 2025, Mr. President Donald Trump deeply criticized the United Nations as ineffective, arguing that mostly it issues empty words without solving real crises, so suggesting loss of effectiveness of the United Nations. So yet, as you mentioned, considering Switzerland's deep involvement with the United Nations system, I wanted to ask you from your perspective, what does this criticism tell us about their effectiveness nowadays?
Good afternoon. Thank you for your speech, first of all. Since you cited the referendum as a very important democratic tool in Switzerland and in today democratic countries, due to big dimension and other elements, the direct democratic tools are less used than in the past. I would like to ask you the importance of a direct democracy tool in the representative democracy of today, and if, according to your opinion, these direct democracy tools will acquire a more important role in the future or not. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'll start with the last one. Well, it's up to every country and to every population of that country how they want to structure the way they participate in the public debate and the legislative process. I'm not here to lecture anyone. This system is suitable to us. There are other countries where you have this kind of participation. There are countries where you have it at local level. Some countries which are organized in a completely different way have tried these tools. So for me, the most important thing I would say is to make sure that people share what governments decide for them in a way or another. You know, if you appoint, your representative in parliament and he's defending the views that he presented to you in order to be elected, and fair enough. It does not have to be, direct participation. This being said, you can manage, I think, almost everywhere to have a popular participation in the decisions. So why not? My point is, again, I want to make sure that what I do as a diplomat, paid by you, answers to the questions you ask me when you appointed me. So you do it directly, fair enough. You do it through a parliament, fine. So I would not say that representative democracy, parliamentary democracy is less worth than semi-direct we have. We never say that. Neutrality, you see, I see what you mean. And in such cases, it's so evident, that you say you cannot be neutral. Good. But in other cases, where there is an established system of rules and of institutions to say whether what's happening is lawful or not, it's not up to us to decide. So justice, it's either an objective concept or it's very subjective. And what my government decided is that in this situation, we have two countries at war. And, and the organ that has to state that one country is an aggressor and the other one is a victim, hasn't said anything. So now you're saying, well, but this Security Council does not work. So what do? We change it. That's what we've been trying to do in the UN for the last 20 years, to have a Security Council which is working differently, taking away veto rights in such things. No one really followed us. And now they are telling us, well, but you cannot be neutral in such a situation. Well, why not? I mean, either there are rules or there aren't. But I see your point. And this is also discussed in Switzerland very deeply, It's sometimes disturbing that we treat the same, the aggressor and the victim. Now, as I explained to you, it's only military. All the rest, we are not treating, the two parties the same way. Really not. But when it comes to weapons, that's the last hard, core of neutrality we cannot touch. If we do, then we stop being neutral. The criticism of the UN. Well, you should ask the question, the one who criticized the UN, not me. You see, actually, if we are honest with ourselves, there is a problem. There are two problems. The first one is when it comes to peace and security. The Security Council is not able today to function as it was supposed to do. The cross vetoes when it comes to conflicts around the world makes it impossible for them to decide. But all other things are decided. There are resolutions of the Security Council. There are many resolutions of the General Assembly. So the machine is not working that bad. And there are not that many either, When you go then to the specialized agencies around the world, think of the, PNUD, UNRWA, or you can name many. Of course, you can always be more efficient. Efficient means, do the same good things with less money. We also can in our system. But, saying that since they are not very efficient, they should be just, eliminated. What's the alternative? What do we do? If we get rid of the multilateral system and all these agencies, we built up, what do we have? And so we should always try and make the things better. Of course, you can cut here and there if it's necessary, but just throw everything away will not help. I could give 1,000 examples of decisions by UN bodies or international bodies or multilateral bodies which make your life possible, starting with your smartphones. They only function thanks to international rules, or they would not work. You are all dressed thanks to international rules. You can go to Fiumicino and board an aircraft and fly wherever you like, thanks to international rules, not to the rules of one country deciding what's good or what's not. So that's the answer I would give. Of course, let's make the system more efficient. Let's make it more powerful, but not in weakening the system and thinking that we will make it stronger. You see the contradiction? It's not possible. Yes.
Hello, thank you for being here. I fully appreciate that. I think also all of us, I would say. I would like to ask you, how do banks and insurance companies, in particular in Zurich, influence Swiss economic policy, and what should be implemented by Italy, even though we got famous insurance companies like Generali, that is also a sponsor of this festival. That's all. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
The influence of the banks and the insurance companies, in particular in Zurich, in Switzerland, in the decisions of the economic policy. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much for your speech. I'm Theodore. I'm from France, and I had a question. Switzerland federal system relies on a delicate balance between 26 cantons, as you said, with cultural and economical differences. With the financial equalization system, richer cantons contribute to support poorer ones. But do you think that in the future, some residents might be maybe a bit frustrated about this? And could this strengthen national cohesion, for example?
Mr. Ambassador, I wanted to ask, you state that nearly 25% of Switzerland's population is foreign-born. And as an immigrant myself, this highly interests me, especially given the growing hostility towards immigration in Europe. Sorry. So how does the Swiss Confederation balance these dynamics between this national debate on migration and how does it balance this immigration? Thank you.
Okay. Well, you know, big companies, big multinationals, you know, don't need to mention one, all of them, they pursue the same interests everywhere in the world. So first of all, they want to make money. Second, they have to have clients to make money. And thirdly, of course, they try and influence the legislative process so that it is the most suitable possible to what they do. That's their job. You have to accept that. Now, if the rules are clear for all, we don't see why they would not be able to do so. They have lobbyists in the parliament. They are declared as such. They participate in, you know, in the decision shaping, the decision making. They can bring themselves in, and I would say they are pretty influential. All of them. They are, by the way, like in Italy, they are united in a big confederation, so the Economie Suisse. They have sectoral, you know, Confindustria, le MEDEF in France, and so on. So you have it everywhere. It's part of the social and economic fabric of one country. Now, what you have to make sure is that what they do is in accordance with the law, and that they do that. So I would say that I'm quite cool about that. You know, the institutional safeguards are good enough, you know, to take in all possible opinions. And by the way, this is something else. They are a pillar of the economy, you know. They create working places, they create wealth, they pay taxes, and so on and so on. So it's very important for a small country like Switzerland to have these multinational companies have their seat there. But it's also important, and they understand that they have to abide by the rules as everybody else in Switzerland and abroad. And I think that more and more this is happening for sure in Europe, and so I'm fine with that. The second question is about the péréquation financière, as we call it in good English. It's a very articulated system we have in Switzerland almost ever since, to make sure that there is not only a social cohesion in the country, but also an economic cohesion. So payments go from bottom up to top up to the government. They go down where they need, you know, taxes or kind of taxes. Federal taxes are quite low compared to cantonal taxes, but there is also an horizontal sharing of wealth between the richest and the poorest cantons. It is reviewed everywhere according to the economic power of the cantons, and is accepted as a necessary tool to make sure that there is a national cohesion. It's quite an extraordinary system. You have it, by the way, also in the European Union, but it is reserved for new, well, they're not that new anymore, but you know, for member states which have joined the European Union later, and they need to compensate rapidly in order to make sure that the European Union has a social and economic cohesion. So we have this system ever since. It is not You know, it's not in danger at all. But every year, of course, there are discussions about, you know, the rich Geneva paying big amount of money in poorest canton, which are then politically more conservative. Geneva is more, you know, open to the world. And so the discussions will always take place, but the system is not in danger. So 25% of the residing population in Switzerland is foreigner, but 3/4 are Europeans. So this makes things a little bit easier, you know, to manage. Italians, Spaniards, Portuguese, Germans, and so on. We share ever since the same history. And so it's not really an issue of integration. On the contrary, we absolutely need, you know, these people, first of all, to sustain the domestic demand. And second, because we don't have enough working people, you know, to sustain a very developed economy we have. But at the same time, it is true that, you know, going from 7.5 to 9 million in a very short time has created some difficulties. Think of infrastructure, traffic, public transportation, housing. It's not easy to manage. We had at a certain time, you know, 75 to 80,000 newcomers per year. It's like a small city in Switzerland, you know. I think we managed pretty well by integrating in the working place, by integrating in schools, by, you know, having a cantonal system whereby if you are in Geneva, you have to learn French. If you are in Zurich, you have to learn German quite rapidly to have an harmonious situation. But it's not given forever, you know. So we have to pay attention that this integration effort requires money and efforts is sustained. When it comes to, I'm sorry to use this adjective, I hate that, but you know, so that you understand, illegal migration. So people coming in, not for work, but you know, because they are fleeing some situation. There the situation is calmer these days, I would say. We had periods where we had also 50, 60, 70, 80,000 people, you know. The migration management of the European Union has helped, you know, manage a little bit better the situation. But we still face quite a lot of challenges also in this regard. The population is okay, but I am not hiding the fact that there are sovereignist parties gaining out of this situation in Switzerland too. This is a general trend in Europe. And the answer to that is not to deny the problem, is to deal with the problem. And we are thinking of ways of, you know, without allowing asylum, which is a very complicated procedure. And in most of cases, this person do not deserve asylum in legal terms. It's a little bit like the neutrality. The Asylum Convention of 51 and the asylum laws are quite restrictive to see whether we cannot, you know, given the fact that you cannot send them back, integrate them in, you know, more rapidly in the economic circuit, in the social circuit. We are beginning to understand, to realize that we will need these people in 20, 30, 40 years. And so we are defending our borders today, but in 20, 30 years, we'll be fighting to each other to have these people because we are aging. We don't make children anymore. And so we will take care of the economy of the society. If we are old men alone in Switzerland, very difficult. So it's a little bit cynical what I'm saying, but perhaps sometimes, you know, being realistic and a little bit cynical is also good to make the good things. And I think that slowly this is settling in, you know. But of course, these days the situation is quite calm, thanks to all happening around us, and it can change pretty rapidly. When it comes to crisis, this is another issue. There, the Swiss population is very, very open. You know, we accepted 80, 90,000 Ukrainians. We have accepted Afghans, Syrians. In the 90s, thousands of Kosovars. Today, there are 200,000 Kosovars living in Switzerland, and almost 200,000, I say Yugoslavs, just that you understand, from other countries of the former Yugoslavia. This was not a problem, you know. When the Swiss people see that there is a huge crisis, they're very open, very generous. But at the same time, you don't have to think of Switzerland of a country where everybody is rich, you know. There are also people struggling to join the two ends of the month. We have to pay huge amounts of money for social security, health insurance, taxes, housing. The life is very expensive. And so if you look at us macroeconomically, you will see what the richest country of the world. But this is statistic, you know. Also have people who struggle, but not, you know, when I say struggle, relatively to the situation they live in. When we have to be generous, we are very generous. But at the same time, we are very, you know, careful not to alter the balance of the country, because we know what it means if, you know, this balance is not kept. It means simply more investment, more money, more efforts, you know, to bring people in, to integrate them, to let the space they need to be what they are, but at the same time to be ready to share our values and our constitutional principles.
I see there are no other questions, so we can just move to the end of this session. In case you have any closing remarks, otherwise we will just end it right now. So, session is over. Applause for the ambassador.